Orpheus's worship was believed to have originated in Thrace, where cannabis was utilized to induce a shamanic state 3,000 years ago. Interestingly, the Thracians worshipped Hera in their pantheon of deities, and we have discussed already Hera's cult's use of asterion, the star herb. One of the rare times that cannabis was referred to by the name Cannabis in Greek literature occurred in a long-lost Greek tragedy, Thamyrias, by Sophocles. Unfortunately, no existing copies of the text exist, but the play and its references to cannabis are referred to in other existing ancient Greek documents. From what can be gathered, Thamyrias told the tale of a Thracian shaman singer who had a devil went down to Georgia-style musical battle with the muses, which he apparently lost, breaking his lyre in a fit of anger at the end. This is made less surprising by the fact that the people of this region were known to be closely related to the Scythian tribes, who we have discussed already for their ritual use of cannabis. The Thracians deeply influenced Greek culture in a number of ways, and such a technique of ecstasy among a group that held so much of an influence over Greek magical philosophies and religious traditions could hardly have gone unnoticed. The Thracian influence on Greek culture can be found by the Thracian origin of two figures prominent in Greek mythology, the god of intoxication Dionysus and the shaman prophet Orpheus, the founder of the mysteries.
You asked about Orpheism, and one of the problems is that cannabis is often not called cannabis in our sources, and the most common way to refer to it was apparently smoke.
The most obvious ancient name for cannabis probably was simply smoke, kapnos. The smoke walkers, or Kapnobatai, were shamans who accessed a trance state by fumigation, most probably with cannabis fumes.
There were also Kapnomanteion, which was someone who was a prophet on smoke, and Kapnobatai, someone who was visionary with smoke. And it obviously refers to shamans who use a kapnos or smoke entheogen, and this is probably cannabis.
As smoke, it lurks in the famous parody of Socrates in Aristophanes' Clouds comedy, 423 BCE.
The chorus in the Clouds is specifically designated as smoke.
More explicitly, clouds of smoke. It's specified.
And there's a joke involved there.
The philosopher was introduced on stage, hanging high in a basket, so that he can access his high thoughts as he summons his clouds of smoke beneath him. If he were not high, he could never have had his philosophical ideas.
They are clouds of smoke inhaling their own ethereal essence. Without that, they could never get high. The really interesting thing about this is public performance. It means that the whole audience in Athens know about kapnos smoke and that it gets you high.
Just before Socrates came swinging in high in his basket, his students were parodied as burning coals in his think shop. This is in the likeness of the Scythian cannabis fumigation tents, as they searched for the secrets of the mysteries. Herodotus had described this ritual in his history, which was current knowledge at the time of the Clouds comedy. With the historian just recently deceased, Herodotus had probably given public readings of his history in Athens. We have to remember that people didn't read. They could read, but there weren't any books, and reading was tedious. It was public performance, and Herodotus is known to have performed his history in Athens. He describes the Scythian cult of the dead, in which the men set up small teepee-like tents and creep inside, tossing cannabis onto red-hot coals in a brazier to produce a highly intoxicating fumigation that transported them to a state of ecstasy. The description fits perfectly the parody of Socrates' think shop. Inside the frontisterion of so-called wise souls are students who claim that the universe is like a covered incense burner or so-called choker, and we men are like the burning coals, punning on the word for men, anthropoi, and coals, anthrakes.
And with regard to the Orphics, mostly the texts are misunderstood, but in Euripides' Hippolytus, he is portrayed as an Orphic, and his father tells him, since he is damning him, to go and worship the smoke of the Orphic books. People think that means he's to burn the books, but it's the smoke that's prescribed in the sacred texts, and it's being derided.
As the undisputed masters of healing herbs, at least according to the Greeks, the Thracians were no strangers to the shamanic techniques of ecstasy well known among cultures of the steppe. Strabo reported that the Mysians, a Thracian group from northwestern Anatolia, possessed members of their society called the Kapnobatai, those who walk in smoke. This reference to the walkers in smoke may allude to the ecstasy achieved by mass cannabis consumption, as reported by Herodotus among the Scythians. In the shamanic mystery initiations, as practiced by the Orphic cults, near-death experiences and the use of dangerous doses of hallucinogenic plants went hand in hand. Whereas the divine bridegroom Sabazios, a cognate of Dionysus, was primarily the god who presided over ecstasy and intoxication, the Thracians held him in equally high regard as a dying and rising savior god and a master over the souls of the deceased. Long before the introduction of alcohol, shaman exploited the ecstatic and oracular properties of hallucinogenic mushrooms, such as Amanita muscaria or various types of coprophytic psilocybin-containing mushrooms, opium, Jimson weed, thornapple, mandrake root, cannabis, deadly nightshade, and henbane. The experience of death and the ecstatic evacuation of the soul from the body appears commonly in the Thracian funeral iconography on which is depicted the Tree of Life. To be in a state of ecstasis, that is, to stand outside the body, was to experience death itself. It is both a physical and a symbolic self-sacrifice. These states were achieved through extended periods of fasting, dance and drumming, sleep deprivation, trials and ordeals, isolation and incubation, and the ritual consumption of these consciousness-altering substances, all of which were methods that could be, and often were, used in conjunction to elicit the ecstatic experience.
Cannabis would have been used by the Orphic mystics in order to induce mystical trance, which they interpreted as a journey out of the body to the outer reaches of the cosmos, to merge with the overmind, the composite intelligence of all life and intelligence that ever existed on the planet. The Scythians were neighbors of the Thracians, and the cult of Dionysus entered Greece through Thrace. It could not have been uninfluenced by the neighboring Scythians.
Dionysus was worshipped by some Scythian groups as evidenced by a number of historical references and artifacts like the gilded silver Scythian dish with a feast of Dionysus on it from the State History Museum in Moscow.
You know, Thracian is a totally different language.
Yeah.
So it's not the Greek language. So the Greeks are trying to understand what the Thracians are doing. And they always kind of describe them in foreign terms. You know, like this is a very foreign culture to us. You know, it's not really. But then comes through Thrace Zagreus. And Zagreus, the worship of Zagreus, the Greeks said, now that we can understand. That we get. And the worship of Zagreus is the process of intoxication, ecstatic, you know, menadic intoxication through different substances. And what are some of these substances? Well, look at what the god is surrounded by. What are the women? The formula is guarded. That's why Pentheus got executed, right? It was because he was trying to find out what they were doing.
About the wines being suffused with a variety of drugs, first of all, the wines could not have produced the intoxication, especially when diluted with water, that are documented. So it pretty much is accepted now that there were additives to the wine.
Cannabis was also commonly available as an additive to wine.
Dating back to the time of Alexander the Great, and possibly earlier, there has been an association between Dionysus and the Indian god of cannabis Shiva, whose relationship with the Indian drink prepared from cannabis, bhang, is very similar to that of Dionysus's with wine. Dionysus and Shiva share the same totem animals, the snake, tiger, and bull, as well as strong elements of phallic lingam worship. It was recorded by chroniclers traveling with Alexander the Great that when they invaded India, the followers of Dionysius and the Indian devotees of Shiva embraced each other as worshippers of the same god. Interestingly, as already noted, some Scythian groups were known to have at times worshipped Dionysus, and also when Scythian groups had control over northern India, they turned to Shiva worship. I actually own a gold coin from the 2nd century AD, which has a Scythian chieftain, all dressed up in the regalia of Shiva, holding his trident and with a drug jar, thus the evidence that the mutual use of cannabis may have been another meeting point of the two gods and the cultures who worship them is not easily dismissed. Other infusions believed to contain hemp were attributed to Democritus and recorded by Pliny. As noted earlier, Bactria is the region where the Russian archaeologist Victor Sarianati found a football field-sized temple, where there is evidence of the large-scale production of cannabis, opium, and ephedra. Cannabis-infused wines were hugely popular throughout the ancient world, and references to them occur in the literature of the Persians, the Chinese, the Assyrians, Jews, and later Muslims, and in some cases the addition of myrrh, as with Democritus' preparation, was also included.